started, Mary Stewart has an announcement, and then I'll introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning. It's so great to see so many faces here. I would like to cordially invite all of you to our 40th anniversary of our Advent Foundation Dinner. It's in the parish paper. It's also in your bulletin today at church. So if you've forgotten to RSVP, we'd love for you to let Elizabeth Hayes know that you're coming. It's Tuesday, September 19th. We're going to have a lovely dinner right here. It is the dinner and a complimentary beer and wine social starting at 5:30. It's underwritten by the Advent Foundation. It's a wonderful time to celebrate all of our many accomplishments and also honor those that have given so generously over the past 40 years. We would love for you to come. Please RSVP, and we look forward to seeing you Tuesday, September 19th. Thank you. Thanks, Dad.
Okay, good morning. This morning we have Stephen Rhoades with us. I'm sure some of y'all are the early service and heard him preach and celebrate. And so he is going to give us a rundown of what's going to be happening during our transition. So welcome, Stephen. He's a kin of the ordinary with the Diocese.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it is a joy to be with you this morning. I bring you greetings on behalf of Bishop Richards. I am the Canon of the Ordinary, which I've had a couple of people talk to me about that this morning. What exactly do you do? This is part of what I do. But the Canon of the Ordinary serves the bishop. I serve as an advisor. I serve in multiple roles for the bishop, including dealing with priesthood, property, financial governance, all kinds of things. But one of the things I also do is I also do some work on transition, and I work with our Archdeacon J.D. Wilson, which I'll explain how all this works in a few minutes. But how many of you have been through a transition before? You know what? You've been in the Episcopal Church. You've been through a transition. How many of you would rather go through a transition rather than another prayer book revision? Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. What I'm here today to talk about is what the transition is going to look like here at the Advent. And I want to start by going through some people that are going to be involved in the transition process. And starting with Diocesan House. People from Diocesan House that will be working with you all. First of all is our Bishop, Daniel Richards. He will be involved in the transition in different ways, and I'll talk about what those ways are going to be as we go through the presentation. Also, this is Janie Wilson. She is the Archdeacon for the Diocese. She most recently was rector at Church of Our Savior in Rock Hill. She has experience on diocesan staff, and she's worked in transition ministry before. So she is my counterpart. She's the Archdeacon. She lives in Columbia. I live up in Greenville. So she lives in Columbia. She will be with you next Sunday. She will be celebrating and preaching at both services so you can get to know her next Sunday. Then there's me, again, as Canon, a much better picture than I look right now. That's me, the Canon of the Ordinary. I will be involved, and I'll tell you how as we go forward. Diocesan House staff are here to guide and support you through this process. Our job is to make sure that the proper process is understood and followed, not to choose your next rector for you. That is not our job. There is a process, there are procedures that need to be followed, and we're here to guide you in those, to support you in those, but it is not our job to choose your next rector. Okay, so I want to make that clear up front. That will be a decision of the Advent, not of Diocesan House. What about from the Church of the Advent? Who will be involved in transition? Stephanie Hall is senior warden and the vestry of the Advent. In the absence of a rector, the senior warden takes on additional authority and responsibility, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But the vestry and the senior warden will primarily be involved in the transition. Also, Paula Griffin will be involved in the transition, and I'll talk more about that later, as well as Joanne Wood is going to be involved going forward. And part of what I am here to do today is to show you what the landscape looks like so that everybody understands what is happening, when it's going to happen, and what it means, okay? So we'll talk more about these roles later as we get into the presentation more deeply. So let's talk about the first stage of the transition process. The first stage of the transition process really is about saying goodbye. Saying goodbye to the now former rector. And the way that works is the rector notifies the bishop of his or her intention to resign their position. The rector then submits a letter of resignation to the vestry. The vestry accepts that letter of resignation, and together they agree upon a date for the resignation to be effective. A celebration of ministry and blessing of the ending of a pastoral relationship is then scheduled for the rector's last Sunday with the bishop or his representative in attendance. So that functionally, that is how a rector leaves a parish. I want to say a word about last Sunday. I could not be more proud of what y'all did last Sunday. It was an opportunity to celebrate 14 years of ministry together, which every rectorship is complicated. But the way you all said goodbye last Sunday and the way Ned said goodbye from the pulpit last Sunday was a gift to both of you. Because what it allows you to do is it allows you to move forward with joy, with thanksgiving, and with anticipation. And it allows Ned to move forward with joy, thanksgiving, and anticipation. And there was a great spirit in church last Sunday. There really was. And I am thankful, so thankful, and so is the bishop, for your generosity, your kindness, for Ned's response. That's the way that we want to bless the ending of a pastoral relationship. Y'all did it right. Because how you say goodbye to someone is going to determine how you will say hello to the next person. And you all did it right. Now that we've celebrated Ned's ministry and his resignation is effective, can he still be involved in the life of the congregation? This is a question we get all the time. And there's a simple two-letter answer. No. Once the rector's resignation is effective, and I'm going to kind of look over here because this is how I do it. I do PowerPoints of things I'm going to say and then I fill in the blanks. Once the rector's resignation is effective, the rector is not allowed to provide pastoral care or celebrate the sacraments or sacramental rites for members of the congregation during the interim period and for a period of 2 years after the calling of a new rector, without the bishop's prior written permission. Doing so will delay and complicate the transition process and interfere with the creation of new, healthy pastoral relationships. Both rector and the congregation must move on for the good of all. And when people have asked me about this, they're like, because I left St. James in Greenville a year ago in June, and people, well, can't you come back and do my funeral? I said, I can't. Well, why not? We want you to come back and do it. I said, because you're in transition. And when you're in transition, it's just weird. It's like going out on a date with your ex driving your Uber. Get it? Okay? People understand that analogy. They look at this and like, well, oh yeah, I get that. I understand how that would be weird. Okay, so, going forward. So now that the rector's resignation is effective and we have no rector, who's in charge? So what I've done in this PowerPoint is I've raised the questions I'm sure you all have. Okay, these are questions every congregation has. So who's in charge now that we have no rector? And this is the second stage of the transition process. This is the interim period. This begins when the rector's resignation is effective. The senior warden takes on many of the non-ordained responsibilities of the rector in the absence of a rector. Among these responsibilities, assuming control of the property, managing the staff, making sure that services are conducted by recruiting and scheduling supply clergy. Now, supply clergy are clergy that come in on a Sunday. Okay, they are not long-term. You can have long-term supply clergy. But for example, I'm supply clergy today. I don't have any written agreement with the Advent. I am a priest in the diocese. I can come and I can celebrate the sacraments with you on a Sunday, and that is supply clergy. So that's part of what the senior warden does. The assisting clergy do not become the rector or assume the responsibilities of the rector. Paula is not going to be the rector or assume the rector's responsibilities, for which I can hear Paula in my head saying, "Thanks be to God." Rather, they remain on staff if requested to do so by the vestry, and your vestry has asked Paula to remain on staff, to continue. The vestry continues in its fiduciary and financial role under the canons, and will also be involved in the interim period in a number of different ways. So with the rector gone, it's really the senior warden in the vestry that takes over a lot of the responsibility of the rector that are non-priestly functions. So do we start getting to look for a new rector right away? The bishop makes that determination. Whether a new search process can be started depends on several factors. Among them are the length of the previous rector's service. The longer they served, the more time required before a search process can begin. The financial health of a congregation, the spiritual health of a congregation, and whether there was any significant conflict in the congregation. So based on the length of Ned's tenure, the bishop has decided an interim rector is needed at the Advent before a search process can begin. So I just said two words that some of you probably have no idea what they mean. Interim rector. What is an interim rector? And what do they do? An interim rector is an experienced priest who has been trained in or has experience in transition ministry, doing this kind of work. The interim rector assumes the full authority of the rector for a time, including managing lay and clergy staff. However, they are not called to be the next rector of the church, but to prepare the church to call a new rector. When an interim rector is called, the increased canonical authority and responsibility of the senior warden ends. And I could hear Stephanie saying, "Thanks be to God." So when an interim rector comes in, they assume the authority of a rector, but they are not going to be the next rector. They are here for a time to help the church prepare for a new rector. So how is an interim rector called? How are they chosen? It's based on the congregation's particular circumstances and needs, but the bishop will recommend a few interim rector candidates for the vestry to interview. The vestry will interview them and choose a candidate the vestry thinks best addresses the congregation's needs. The vestry then negotiates a letter of agreement, which is an employment contract, with the candidate and the start date for the interim rector. So whenever I say letter of agreement, that is an employment contract for clergy. It's called a letter of agreement. And there are 3 signatories on a letter of agreement: the senior warden on behalf of the vestry, the candidate for the position, and the bishop. So there are 3 parties to a letter of agreement. Okay? What do we do until an interim rector is called? So there have not been a slate of interim rector candidates presented to the vestry yet. So what do you do until an interim rector is called? The senior warden, Stephanie, will continue to exercise increased authority and responsibility for the congregation under the canons until the interim rector is called. Stephanie has asked Parish Administrator Joanne Wood to manage the staff on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so Joanne will manage the staff on a day-to-day basis, with decisions regarding discipline, hiring, and termination reserved to the senior warden, because that's really where they belong at this point. Normally, those are rector decisions. However, in the absence of a rector, the senior warden takes over that authority. Supply clergy will officiate at Sunday services. Some faces will be familiar to you. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag of who you might be seeing up behind the altar, but some faces may be familiar with you, some will not. Some will be new. But I know by the way that I have been welcomed here, y'all will welcome people generously and kindly. And I thank you for that in advance. Because as supply clergy, we're really not quite sure where everything is up on the altar and the way each church does it differently. But y'all and your servers, your acolytes, your lay Eucharistic ministers, Paula, have all been so gracious and kind. They help us stumble through doing the service. And I'm very grateful for that. Paula will cover the majority of the midweek services and will be focusing on pastoral care and reaching out to members of the Advent. Paula will have the close support of the diocesan house clergy staff. Paula will have my support and J.D. Wilson's support, the archdeacon. Okay, and she can call us all the time, anytime. She's got our cell phone numbers. We are here to help support Paula in her ministry here. But one of the things that, Paula was brought in for, and where her gifts lie, is pastoral care. And that's what she needs to be focusing on. The senior warden and Paula will consult with diocesan house clergy staff regarding special clergy coverage for funerals, weddings, or special services. So we'll make sure all of the services get covered. And we'll work with Stephanie and we'll work with Paula on making sure that all happens. Most importantly, life at the Advent will go on. The annual meeting will be held as usual. Vestry elections will be held as usual. Delegates to diocesan convention will be elected, and vital ministry will continue. Keep calm and carry on. Life goes on. Okay? How long will we have an interim rector? How long will they be here? The bishop, the interim rector, and the wardens and vestry will be in constant contact as to how the interim period is going and what progress is being made. The interim rector might come in and identify some issues and say, I think we need to work on these things to get to a place where we're ready to call a new rector. The process cannot be rushed and does not have a predetermined end date. Only after consulting with the interim rector, the wardens, and the vestry, and being satisfied that the congregation is ready to move to the next step, will the bishop authorize the search for a new rector to begin. Okay? So you'll be living with the interim rector for a while. I can't say how long it will be. I can't say how short it will be. A lot's going to depend on the interim rector coming in, helping to assess the congregation with the wardens and the vestry, and getting you to a place where you're ready to move to the next search process. There needs to be some time and some space. The longer a priest is at a parish, the longer you need to take a deep breath and to reorient yourself. Because the Advent is not the same place as it was 14 years ago. It's a different place. You have different needs, different priorities. And it's important that you come to understand who you are in this moment in time, in going and looking for somebody. And that when you're going to look for a new rector, it's not just a reaction to what has been, but that you understand yourselves and what you need. The third stage of the process, the search begins. So an interim rector has been in place, the interim rector, the bishop, the senior warden, the vestry all agree, yes, the Advent is ready to progress and start a search process. So what does the search process look like for a new rector? And I'm jumping way ahead here, by the way. Part of me wanted to just stop at interim rector, but I know you all have questions. I know you want to know what this looks like, so I'm going to lay out the landscape for you so you know what it looks like going forward. And you'll understand what your vestry has to go through during this interim period. When the bishop authorizes a search process to begin, the Archdeacon, J.D. Wilson, will meet with the vestry to do some preliminary work prior to the forming of a search committee. This includes assessing the congregation's needs, using a data-based assessment tool to get a snapshot of the congregation, building an OTM. OTM stands for Office of Transition Ministry. We used to have what was called the Church Deployment Office. Many people thought that sounded way too militaristic, that you're being deployed. So now we have the Office of Transition Ministry. It's kind of soft and squishy. Office of Transition Ministry. So you build what's called an Office of Transition Ministry profile. And in that profile, it will say, we're looking for a part-time rector, full-time rector. This is the amount of compensation we can offer. These are the kind of benefits we can offer. These are the characteristics we're looking for in this person. And there are about 5 narrative questions where the congregation talks about itself and talks about who you are, things you've done, things that are important to you. And all Episcopal clergy are part of what's called the OTM. We all have a login, and we can go in and we can pull up job listings anywhere in the country. We can pull it up by diocese. We can pull it up by full-time, part-time. We can pull it up by city. We can pull it up by compensation range. We can pull it up in any number of ways. And that is kind of the help wanted pages for the Episcopal Church. So that will be prepared. You'll also develop a rector search webpage. That is incredibly important these days, because the first thing clergy are going to do when they see a job advertisement, they're going to go to your website and find out about you. They want to know who you are, what you do. They want to know what your congregation looks like. So having a fantastic rector search page is incredibly important, because I'll be honest with you, in terms of the landscape for transition right now, it used to be that you might get 9 or 11 applications for every position. Now, for the biggest openings, we're lucky if we get 5. There is a severe clergy shortage in the church. So the more you sell your congregation and your community, why does somebody want to move here to Spartanburg? What's great about living in Spartanburg? Why should you want to be here? That's important stuff to put in that rector search webpage, and Archdeacon Wilson will work with you all in terms of putting together a webpage that will draw the attention of clergy to the Advent. Also, she'll discuss the size, makeup, and training of the search committee. So that's part of this. The Archdeacon does this preliminary work with vestries before search committees are called, and then she also works with the search committees. So that's the transition work she does. Based on this work, the vestry will write a charge for the search committee, and the charge is a guide for the search committee as to the primary gifts and talents that are needed in the next rector. They'll identify some characteristics that they think are important, and they'll give that in a charge to the search committee. We charge you to find us a next rector who is learned, compassionate, great preacher, a list of things. And they give that to the search committee, then they impanel the search committee. The vestry creates the search committee, okay? And typically what we see in a search committee, we might see 5 members, we might see as many as 9, but the larger you get, the more unwieldy and difficult to control that committee in terms of getting meetings together and people doing things. So it typically is about 5 people is what we see usually in a search committee. So the members of the search committee are drawn from the congregation and should not be vestry members, but must be independent of the vestry. Once chosen, there is often a commissioning of the search committee during a Sunday morning service. You commission your search committee. The work of the search committee, I did a separate slide and did this in big letters. The work of the search committee must be independent of the vestry and strictly confidential. And that independence and confidentiality must be respected by the vestry and the congregation alike. Not everyone's going to be happy with that answer. But what happens is, if the work of the search committee is not confidential and independent, all of a sudden you have 100 people on your search committee. I say 12 is a real push. 100 is completely unworkable. So that has to be confidential, and it can be frustrating. And what Janie and I tell vestries when they say, well, can we ask how it's going? I said, sure, you can ask how it's going. And the search committee will say, we're following our process. And we'll let you know when we're at the next stage of the process. Okay? First level of discernment. Okay, so the search committee's impaneled, they've been given a charge. We hit the first level of discernment with the bishop and diocesan staff. And this is often an misunderstood level, and I want to explain this carefully. The OTM profile is posted with the Episcopal Church and the application process opens. We're receiving applications. All applications are received at Diocesan House where a preliminary red flag check is completed and an assessment of each candidate is made. Once the application window closes, the applications are reviewed by the bishop and Diocesan House staff and a list of approved candidates forwarded to the search committee. The question for the bishop and Diocesan House staff, is there something in the applicant's confidential background check, or is there such a mismatch of gifts and experience that the bishop can't support them going forward in the process? And let me give you 2 examples. As canon staff, we know other canon staff in other dioceses. So when an application comes in, we call up our compatriot in another diocese and say, hey, tell me about so-and-so. Are there any clergy misconduct charges against this person? Do they play nicely in the sandbox? Are they a challenge? We find out from our compatriots around the church what is going on with that particular clergy person. Because one of the things the bishop does not want to have happen is wait until the very end where you may call this person as a rector and then find out they've had 3 misconduct cases in their past. Also, talk about gift mismatching. It is not uncommon to have graduating seminarians apply to be rectors of 2,000 member churches. That's a bridge too far. You need some experience before you can enter into a system like that. So that is part of what Diocesan House staff and the bishop does. And let me explain something really important here. It is not about theology. It is not about politics. It is simply about, is there something in this person's confidential past, which we have access to, but you would not? Is there something in their confidential past that gives us pause about them going forward? Or are those gifts so mismatched? This person's coming from a charismatic tradition with a liturgical dance, wanting to go to St. Andrew's downtown in Greenville, also known as Smoky Andy's. Gives us pause. Okay? So, a list of candidates is put together and forwarded to the search committee from the bishop's office. And now we enter the second level of discernment in the search committee. The search committee then begins its process of vetting the candidates by reading their materials, holding Zoom interviews, conducting site visits, actually going to their congregations on a Sunday and seeing them in action, with the archdeacon serving as in a resource and support role. And this process can be lengthy depending on the number of candidates. The question for the search committee, the search committee is not to choose your next rector. The question for the search committee, might God be calling this person to be our next rector? So the 3 levels of discernment keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So the search committee is just looking at the candidates and saying, you know, they might be the person. The Spirit is saying this might be the person, but this might be the person too. And we like this one too. And they're all different, and they all have different gifts, and we're so glad we don't have to pick which one. But they help identify the person God might be calling. The 3rd level of discernment is the vestry. When the search committee finishes its process and identifies its top candidates, it holds a joint meeting with the vestry with the archdeacon and me in attendance. The candidates are presented, and the vestry has an opportunity to ask the search committee questions. Once that is done, in that meeting, the search committee is thanked for its service and it is disbanded. They're done. They've done their work. They've been confidential. They have been independent. They have finished the work that the vestry has asked them to do, and now it's in the vestry's lap. And now the vestry takes it up. At this point, I take over as the resource and support role person, and the archdeacon steps back. And the reason for that is, as you move forward with final candidates, I work on scheduling the interviews with the bishop. Each final candidate has to meet with the bishop. I participate in those interviews. I also draft the letter of agreement between the parish and the new rector. So I become involved at the end stage of the process, where the archdeacon is involved in the earlier stage of the process. The question the vestry must answer: which of these candidates, if any, has God revealed to be our next rector? And I put in "with any," if any, on purpose, because sometimes you get to the end of a search and the vestry says, we just don't hear a call for any of these candidates. We just don't see any of them as the right person. And there is no such thing as a failed search. There's a search that's not completed yet, but it's not a failed search. But this is way down the road, y'all. Way down the road. But I want to at least explain that if the search committee has done its work faithfully, and the vestry does their work faithfully, and diocesan house staff and the bishop do their work faithfully, there is no such thing as a failed search. The timing is wrong, or the person that God is revealing to be your next rector may not be available yet. So that is down the road, but the vestry will have the candidates that they can look at and decide which one they think should be the next rector, if any. The process before the vestry is also independent and confidential. They conduct their own interviews with the candidates and bring the finalists for on-site interviews. Now, I have to tell you a funny story about this. You always try to be anonymous during an on-site interview. And I interviewed at All Saints Church in Winter Park, Florida, and I was told, sit in the back of the church. There was 400 average Sunday attendance at this particular service. Sit in the back of the church. Don't wear your clericals, don't wear your collar, just wear normal clothes. No one will know. So I did. And I'm walking up to receive communion past the choir, which sat facing each other between the altar and the congregation. And I hear one choir member lean over to the other one and go, "Is that him?" But try to keep things confidential and try to be anonymous. And then the choir director came up to me after the service and said, "Have you ever thought about joining our choir?" And I'm like, actually, well, I didn't say this, but I'm thinking I was hoping for a different position, but it doesn't work out, maybe. So, site visits, they're brought in for a site visit. After prayerful discernment and discussion, the vestry calls one of the candidates as a new rector. The candidate may or may not accept. In these days, each candidate probably is in 4 or 5 search processes. They may fall in love with another parish. You might have fallen in love with this candidate, but they may have fallen in love with another parish, and they may say no, which is hard. But ultimately, we have to remember that God is in control of the process, and God will reveal the right person to bring to the Advent for this season of your life. If they accept, there's negotiations on the letter of agreement that starts. Once the letter of agreement is signed by the senior warden, the rector designate, and the bishop, a call can be announced that Advent has a new rector, and we're announcing it. We've announced 4 new rectors in this diocese. When I started this job a year ago in June, we had 9 openings out of 60 congregations. So we've managed to fill a lot of them. There are still a few openings. We've managed to fill St. Peter's in Greenville, St. James in Greenville. We have filled St. John's in Hopkins. We're about to announce a call in another couple of parishes as well. So diocesan house staff works hard with the congregations to find the people to serve based on the kind of rector that you're looking for. We will work hard on it. We will put out information to all the other diocesan transition ministers over and above the OTM profile saying, hey, there's this great parish that's opened up, applications are in process. This is what they're like. Please talk to your clergy. If you think there's somebody who's ready to make a move, encourage them to apply. So that's part of what we do as diocesan house staff. But we have no role in this part of the process. Once those names are handed over to the search committee and the vestry, we don't choose, we don't vet, We don't exclude. Now, if something comes up that we become aware of, say there was no problem with a particular candidate, but some clergy misconduct charges are filed in the midst of a search, then we will forward that information on. Okay? But once this is done, once the letter of agreement is signed, a call can be announced. So now we have the fourth stage in the process, welcoming a new rector. The interim rector resigns their position as of the start date for the new rector. So there's continuity. The new rector assumes all the rights and responsibilities of the rector beginning on their start date. About a month after the rector begins his or her tenure, the bishop comes to the parish for a formal liturgy and reception, celebrating the new ministry of this new rector. And it's a great liturgy where a whole bunch of people line up and give the rector stuff. Like, here are keys to the church. Keep it open. Here's a Bible. Read it. Here are the canons. Follow them. Here's water. Baptize. Here's oil. Heal. Here are the vessels. Celebrate the sacraments for the people. That is a great liturgy because it helps to define what a new rector is and what a new rector does and the responsibilities placed on them by the bishop. Because the rector really is the bishop's representative in the parish. Okay? So that is a great liturgy and it is a great celebration to welcome a new rector. That's what it looks like. That's what the process is going to look like at the Advent, start to finish. Sometimes there may be off-ramps that have to be taken. Sometimes you may have to stop at a rest area on the journey. But that is the roadmap for what transition at the Advent is going to look like. You're not going to start a search for a new rector right away. The bishop's going to recommend some candidates for an interim rector, and until the interim rector is in place, you're going to see people like me and others show up on Sundays to assist Paula. Paula's going to be part of the rotation, the regular rotation of celebrating and preaching. She'll be part of the normal rotation like she was before. But it is important to understand, and having been an assistant that went through a transition process, it is incredibly critical to understand that the assistant does not become the rector. And part of the reason for that is to protect the assistant. When those boundaries start getting blurred, it makes it more difficult for that assistant to stay on with the new rector coming in. So those boundaries are important to observe. Paula is here for pastoral care. She's here to do the things she was doing before. She's going to be working with liturgy. She's going to be working in a number of areas, including, as I said, focusing on pastoral care and reaching out to members of the Church of the Advent. But she's not going to be the rector, nor is she going to be the interim rector. And that is for her protection. Because she was not hired to be a rector. She was hired to do pastoral care, which is how her gifts are. That's where her gifts are. So be gentle with Paula. And be kind with Paula. And please don't go to Paula to complain. Transitions are always difficult. If you have something that you want to complain about, talk to a vestry member. Take it to where it needs to go. Take it to a vestry member. Okay? But the Advent is strong. You have a strong foundation. You have great ministries. You have a vital congregation and a vital role to play in Spartanburg. You're celebrating a big anniversary this year, and the presiding bishop's coming. You have a lot to be proud of. You have a lot to be thankful for. Has everything always been perfect? No. I've never once found an Episcopal church where everything has always been perfect. But you have a solid foundation. You have good people in leadership. And you're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay. And we are here as diocesan house staff to walk with you through this process and help support you. Because the diocese doesn't exist in Columbia. You are the diocese. St. Matthew's is the diocese. St. Christopher's is the diocese. Epiphany is the diocese. St. James is the diocese. St. Peter's. Good Shepherd in York is the diocese. Our Savior Rock Hill is the diocese. Grace Camden is the diocese. St. Thaddeus Aiken is the diocese. You are all the diocese. We are all one family, and diocesan house staff serve you. That's our job. And it is our joy to do so. So at this point, are there any questions that I can answer for anybody? So,
Yes, sir. At some point, would an in-place vestry and wardens be asked to stay over their normal elapsed time, or in other words, vestry frozen? We had that experience in the past, and I just wonder if that is still a policy. At some point, this process is going to go on too long for current vestry, perhaps.
it is not, and never has been an official policy. It has been used on occasion where needed, and the bishop feels there is no need to freeze a vestry here. But you need to go about your life. And you need to have vestry elections and annual meetings, and you need to continue on with your life. Now, it could not have been that good. I mean, come on. There's got to be stuff. Sir?
For what you've experienced with the parishes in transition, what's the average term for that transition currently?
What's the average? Well, it all depends if we're talking about an interim rector, if it was a short rectorate previously, if the search committee is put together straight away. Once you start the search process, okay, once you get that search process begun, you're probably looking at, once you post, usually the postings go 6 to 8 weeks that they're open. So once you get something posted, you're probably looking at a 6 to 9 month process.
Thank you.
Yes?
Who appoints the chair of the search committee?
Oh, well, I don't, pick an emoji, somebody, which one do you want? Boys, fix it. I can turn it off now because I don't need it. It's done different ways. I have seen it where the vestry has impaneled a search committee and named a chair, but I've also seen where a vestry has impaneled a search committee and allowed the search committee to name their own chair, based on how much time people have and what their gifts and talents are. So it can be done either way, but that is really part of the charge to the search committee that the vestry will make. And that will be deciding how many will be on the search committee. I was chair of the standing committee of the diocese when we went through the bishop search. And we had to, well, thank you. I think so. I think we did a great job. I mean, he hires quality, so I think we did a great job. But part of that process is identifying people that are gifted and representative in the congregation. For example, a lot of times when we see a search committee put together, you'll try to get people who are older members of the congregation, maybe some younger members that have children, people that are at the 8 o'clock, some are at the 10:15. So you get a real cross-section of what your congregation looks like. So when the search committee works together, those voices are all present and they're all heard. And the vestry can either say, we want this person to be the chair, or say, you all organize yourself and decide who should be the chair. So it could be either way. Yeah?
No, it's a difficult question to answer, but when we look at kind of the landscape of the Advent, I know I like to think we're a larger church, certainly in Spartanburg, but if you look at bigger landscape, it might be a smaller church. Does it tend to take a little bit longer for churches our size to get expectations, or is it something where we would be, we're the right size to be sought after, or kind of an expectation? When you say there's 9 that are still searching, I guess where would we land somewhat in expectation of how healthy we are, or whatever?
I would say completely unsupported by data, this opinion. But what my gut tells me is the larger the church, the more ministries they have going on, and the better the compensation package for a new rector, those get noticed. they get noticed. Churches that, well, and not only that, but priests look for particular things. For example, if you've got a priest that's a singer, that loves chanting the liturgy, and that is really important to them, they're not going to go to a church that doesn't have a good music program. Yeah, so it's very particular for the clergy person, but by and large, if you're in a pool of applicants, the applicants are going to try to strive as high as they think they can go. And for many of them, it will be a large church with active ministries and a lot going on. But not everybody. It's so dependent on the person and when this happens, because there is often a window where these things happen. There's a prime window, and it should not be a surprise to anybody. But one of the prime windows, especially for clergy with families, is, they start looking during Lent. Because by the time you start looking, at the beginning of Lent, and you're starting the process of interviewing, so on and so forth, hopefully you're getting to a letter of agreement by July. If we're 6 months, or even earlier, it's after Christmas is often, because clergy don't do anything anyway. So, like, once Christmas is over, you refocus into the new year as clergy, and you start looking. And 6 to 9 months, you could be in a new parish in the fall. You could move your family, you can leave the church you're in now, you can move to a new church. That's workable. And that's something that clergy look at. So there are prime windows where you'll see the most activity on the OTM, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it is all year. So, but yes, being a larger church with a stronger compensation package, you're going to be noticed. Yes?
Is the congregation ever tapped for input on what we're looking for, or is that to the vestry to pick a diverse search committee to represent?
The congregation is part of the very earliest process with the vestry. When the vestry is doing the data gathering, and part of that data gathering might be conversations, a forum with the congregation to listen to what the congregation thinks. So that is part of that early process as the vestry is putting together a profile for the new position. Yes, the congregations are not shut out of the process. Their voices come in early, and they contribute to the overall picture. But as you move forward, you can't have a whole congregation interview candidates and things like that. So, but yes, they are heard early on. And that's part of what Archdeacon Wilson will be doing, is she'll be working with the vestry to facilitate those conversations, like having a forum today and talking about, well, what do you want to see at the Advent? What do you think our next 10 years looks like? What qualities are you looking for in a rector? And to take all of that under advisement in terms of deciding what that profile should look like. Probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yes?
Advent is obviously experiencing budgetary or financial on a trend basis difficulties over the last few years. Is that typical in the diocese?
That is typical of churches everywhere.
Can you repeat the question?
He asked that there's been a negative financial trend at the Advent over the past few years. Is that typical for churches in the diocese? That is typical for churches everywhere. Churches have struggled to come out of COVID. There was already a slight decline financially and in terms of membership going into COVID. COVID has really exacerbated that situation. So here's the thing. Even if there is a financial decline that you have seen, that doesn't mean that that can't be reversed. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be done to remedy that situation and strengthen the Advent financially. So I can tell you the churches that I've worked with in transition, all of them have the same issue. They're all, boy, we wish we could offer this much, but we just can't get there. This is where we're at. It's across the church. Anybody else? Yes?
I just want to take a brief moment. Change is difficult and hard, but I want to commend the staff, especially give a praise and shout out to the staff survey results, and there was a charge to get back in place, to come to church, to volunteer, to cook in the kitchen, to serve as a Sunday school teacher, to really step outside of our comfort zone and reinvest our time and energy in the church. And I think this is another one of those times. I'm hopeful and prayerful that our church will be viable and attractive and healthy to our new candidates that are coming. And God places very special people for us to choose and select from. But I think it takes all of us to participate in that. And I feel like we're preaching to the choir here. But more importantly, to people who aren't here, I think it's a critical time, but also a wonderful time for us to reinvest, grow in a healthy and positive way, and really evaluate our strengths and our weaknesses. Like you've said, I love this church. I know you all love this church. And I'm very hopeful, and I'm excited about the time to come. So,
I'm going to leave it with that. Thank you. Thank you all for your attention, your attendance this morning. Again, if there's anything that we at Diocese and how staff can do to help you all, please let us know. But support your vestry, support your staff, support Paula and her ministry, and it's all going to be all right. Right?